And don't get into the philosophical argument that God created them and they have to be real, or does God exist, because it's really an irrelevant argument in this particular context. The critical thing is, if people will kill others because they think their mystical experience, their God experience was true, shouldn't we know the brain mechanisms responsible for that?
Thank you for joining us. Moonchild 2.0. So what is Moonchild? You'll have to do all your in-depth research elsewhere, friend. But for those who know, we will be diving right in. Those who don't know who Aleister Crowley is, a renowned occultist on the dark side and intelligence agent, MI6, and so on and so forth. Moonchild is a novel written by British occultist Aleister Crowley in 1917. Its plot involves a magician, a magical war between a group of white magicians and a group of black magicians over an unborn child. I'll save the rest for you. Now, to tell you the story of the Moonchild 2.0, we start in a small town now called Glens Falls. Once was called Wings Falls. That's right. It was lost in a liquid dinner and a poker bet. This article only gets it half right. And that's my genealogy, the Wings genealogy. We used to own Wings Falls. I'm a wing. And we fell to our territory, as you will see. My grandfather, as I have discussed in my personal testimony, was an air engineer in World War II, and a useful one. He was from Glens Falls, obviously, formerly Wings Falls, from our ancestors. And he had a logging company and perhaps could recover anything if there was any wreckage in the Adirondacks, which is where we grew up, the Adirondacks. And he worked on NASCAR and made some breakthroughs, but don't go looking, friend. Until we get popular enough to fucking do something, I would appreciate the privacy. So he entered all his sons in NASCAR, and many of them were catastrophically injured, and he had no qualms about a high-risk, high-reward lifestyle, and thus he entered his grandson in a special program. His grandson was born 2 weeks late because the nurses, for caution to my mother, there was something going on at that time, obscure, and even though she felt ready and had given birth prior times before multiple, although I was her firstborn son, they had her hold it for 2 weeks, and I was born on her birthday, which coincidentally was also my grandmother's birthday. And I was born healthy, although heavy, as I was 2 weeks late. Heavy baby. And then one day after a checkup, all of a sudden, boop, my mother said they found a lump that she had never seen before, and she was so distraught and couldn't believe that she had never noticed a lump on her own baby's head. Knowing what we know now, do you think these nefarious doctors could have possibly injected me with saline on a visit in order to get the pretext to sign away the rights for some sort of sick experiment? They don't do that to 11-year-old boys. They don't do that to babies, though. They do. And that's just what they show on paper? You think they ever do more than what they admit to? No. What's theta is considered to be the psychic programming? Bloodliners? Those coming from multi-generational satanic families? They're determined to exhibit a greater propensity for having telepathic abilities than did non-bloodliners. But due to its evident limitations, however, various forms of electronic mind control systems were developed and introduced, namely biomedical telemetry devices, brain implants, telemetry. Remember that word, telemetry. Directed energy lasers using microwaves and or electromagnetics. It is reported that these are used in conjunction with highly advanced computers and sophisticated satellite tracking. And those are familiar. We're talking about Monarch Theta programming, but there's so much more to it, as you will see. Now, unfortunately, it was easy to control me in the situation I was in. And unfortunately, the name of the game is telling everybody they're special and telling them that they have been chosen, that they will be filled with the Spirit, they will be filled, and then on the dark side that they will be the Antichrist. If they're a female, that they will be a mother of darkness. You have to understand, anybody getting programmed gets a little bit of everything. So again, almost all females will have the mother of darkness altar, as you would call it in the textbook sense, as the males will have their Antichrist, and sometimes clones of such. You have to understand how a deliberately created disassociative system is created when we're talking about programmed sleeper agents and multiple agents and super soldiers, satanic super soldiers, and whatever you want to fucking call it. We're talking about a Moonchild, and you're about to see some shit. So, my grandfather was a reverse air engineer and read into these programs in the OSS and CIA and then other programs. And then I was tampered with as a child. And all of a sudden at a checkup got a lump and then they had to do surgery. And what happened? So, going forward, the doctor that did my brain surgery was Dr. Robert J. White, and he was the Catholic Man of the Year in 1994. And he was Knights of Malta, Knights of Columbus, so on and so forth. Neurosurgery and Brain Research Laboratory, he was the chairman. Robert White. Keep that in mind too, 1994. Yes, he pioneered keeping brains in jars and keeping them alive and then getting congressional sign-offs on counterterrorism for in case of a terrorist dies, instead of being able to take alive, that we can still interrogate his brain with EEG readings as we were desperately trying to log, as one would say. And Dr. Robert J. White was the first man to perform a head transplant, and it was on a monkey. Now I will spare you that footage, but it's important that you see the next.
So consciousness can be transplanted. Obviously, personality, if you want to speak of the monkey having personality, can be transferred. And so you might ask, where did this bring us as far as the human spirit or soul goes? And I guess you could argue it can be transplanted.
You see the sort of sick fucks we're dealing with, and what we're dealing with. If you've watched this long, you probably already know, and this is going to get interesting, I assure you. And all I ask for at the end of this is your support. This is not easy for me. I was born in formerly Wings Falls of my ancestors, and then Glens Falls, as they had lost it in a poker bet, on my mother and grandmother's birthday. I was born adjacent to an area called 88 Acres. It was a safari walk, notified before entry, attend Children's Day on Path, and it was a botanical garden, and had such things such as belladonna, and they would extract scopolamine and so on and so forth. And they had different animals there and would have different sounds go off. And the Van Dusens owned it. Dick Van Dusen. And remember the name Charlie Chickadee. We'll say that pop up various places. That is code phrase. Now, Dick Van Dusen, Richard Van Dusen, established his nursery, which was botanical garden, and they had exotic things such as belladonna, and again would extract scopolamine and different things from different plants. And it was a land grant from the Queen, 88 acres. Now you will see the name of that in just a second. Grew up in Glens Falls, again, used to be Wings Falls. And then he went to SUNY, which is the New York University that now has the DARPA nanotech complex. And he was in the Navy and worked for Exxon, the oil company. And over the years he traveled to Africa and Tanzania. And he wrote a book called Safari Ferrari. He opened 88 acres on property. 88, HH. You know what this is. Spiritual transference is what they claim. And it doesn't matter what you believe, because I'm just telling you. Africa game hunts, so on and so forth. So yes, he was a hunter. The hunting games, the most dangerous games. And I'll spare you that because in my testimony I say a little. Now, if you've ever walked through Jungle Land at Storytown or visited Adventureland at Disney World, the 88 acres version was merely a smaller and more simplified version of both. So if you understand what this was a programming route, but he was involved deeply. And the reason that I tell you about the Van Dusens and 88 acres is merely because of something called astrogenetics. That was also written by a Van Dusen. And yes, I know the name is spelled slightly different, but I assure you they are the same family, and that can be verified if you so wish to do. And how your parents' genes and your season of birth can influence your life, and it goes so much more. And again, I was born on my mother and my grandmother's birthday. And it seems that they influenced this when I was born. As I said, I was born late and they demanded such. Again, remember, I was already enrolled in one of these programs that so many have heard of. 88 Acres, ran by the Van Dusens. The same family wrote a book called Astrogenetics, which is about your and your parents' birth date, which is about how your and your parents' birth date affect your genetic makeup. And now this is, which coincidentally dies with my generational birthday, obviously, which I was raised right next to the town of Dresden, which is where they did the ritual from the Dresden Codex. The Dresden Codex is an important Maya codex depicting rituals. What am I talking about here? And this was 2013, although I see you do not have reference. We will get there. And there is also another book called Astrogenetics, and it is a Mayan prophecy, because the Mayans, as you know, were into celestial situations. And what we will get into is the Dresden Codex, as I had said. What is the Dresden Codex? The Dresden Codex is a Maya book, which was believed to be the oldest surviving book written in the Americas. The codex depicts hieroglyphics and numerals and figures, and contains ritual and divination calendars. Now remember the word divination, which is to see the future, but we will investigate that more in depth shortly. Ritual and divination calendars that go according to calculations of the phases of Venus, eclipses of the sun and moon, instructions relating to the New Year ceremonies, and descriptions of the locations of the rain god. Yes, of the rain god. This is the Mayans. They believed in these things. So they had this tablet, which was the oldest in the Americas, and it described ritual and divination calendars of the eclipses and locations of their rain god, which you will find out later. But spoiler alert, it's Hadad, Hadad, Baal, Hayel, Rael. So, moving forward, the Dresden Codex. And this has been broken, just like the Tablet of Palenque. These dot systems are not only numbers and things like this for communicating, but also in the Tablet of Palenque, there's a folding system with the dots. And it is a pictorial. And it has been decoded by someone named Maurice Cotterell, who is a quirky figure, but did learn that. The Dresden Codex contains accurate astronomical tables, which are recognized by students of the Codex for its detailed Venus tables and lunar tables. The lunar series has intervals correlating with eclipses, while the Venus tablets correlate with the movements of the planet Venus. The Codex also contains astrological tables and ritual schedules. The religious reference shows a cycle of 260-day ritual calendar, the important Maya royal events. And 260 days, 260 days, 9 months, the gestation period for a female human, right? The Codex also includes information of the Maya New Year ceremony and the rain god Chalk. And you can look this up yourself, but the rain god Chalk in Mayan is Tlaloc in Aztec, Hadad, Ramon, Baal, Hayel, Rael, all of these. You know, same god, different names across different things. Look into this if you wish. Now, what were the Mayans, what were the Aztecs into? Quetzalcoatl, Cocachol. I'm saying that wrong. But Quetzalcoatl may be right. Cocolco. I don't remember. Either way. The feathered serpent, right? Now, this is the Maurice Cotterell I speak of. Tutankhamun prophecies. The Tutankhamun prophecies. The sacred secret of the Maya, Egyptians, and Freemasons. And we all know. So, backing off from the Dresden Codex, that remember was the eclipse cycles, Saros 128, for example. So, we already have the astrogenetics, again, that was written by the Van Dusens. That was the same family that also ran 88 Acres in Glens Falls, that used to be Wings Falls. Now, what else was happening around this time? There's something called Clementine, the Deep Space Program Science Experiment. It mapped the moon and then was to test telemetry. But so much more happened, and you are about to find out what a real Moonchild is, and what the first real success, and how it was their biggest failure.
45 seconds.
Clementine, the Deep Space Program Science Experiment, which was NASA in conjunction with the Ballistic Missile Defense System, which is previously known as Ronald Reagan's Operation Star Wars. Clementine mapped the complete moon, and they released pictures where there has been controversy regarding, but mysteriously went malfunctioning in May 7th, 1994. May 7th, 1994, Clementine was officially malfunctioning. Here is the original Clementine patch. And then another patch. And for those in the know, some will know there was in fact two Clementines. But that is irrelevant at the current time. Outlining the differences. On May 7th, 1994, Clementine experienced a computer failure after it left lunar orbit. It did later regain. On paper, this is what happened. And on paper, later, it was spinning 80 RPM because one thruster fired on paper. And that's what caused the failure on May 7th. But then eventually, a few months later, it regained some telemetry because it was made to fire up when it was in orbit. Regardless, moving on, remember, it was malfunctioning May 7th. And Clementine was called the Deep Space Program Science Experiment. It was a joint space project between Ballistic Missile Defense Organization, previously called the Strategic Defense Organization, and NASA. Okay? Clementine was a joint space project between the Ballistic Missile Defense Organization and NASA, just like I just said. I'm just going over the same thing. The Strategic Defense Initiative, derisively nicknamed the Star Wars Program. This is what the Star Wars program was a proposed missile defense system intended to protect the United States from attack by ballistic strategic nuclear weapons. Okay, so already the little satellite that we sent up, which was named Clementine because lost and gone forever, supposedly because it malfunctioned, was part of the Star Wars program in conjunction? How common is that? Why don't you look into that? Moving on. There's a conspiracy on the internet about Clementine. It's called The Biggest Secret of Mankind. I wonder if that has to do with the pictures. Project Golden Dragon, which is a declassified name for Clementine. Project Golden Dragon. What?
This picture is the official logo of the 1994 Clementine Deep Space 4, the Deep from Earth. There are official is weird, and indeed it looks like an object flying overhead the moon. Oh, and the near-infrared logo shows lots of weird 12 missing data blocks. Surroundings.
And this is objective. I'm not endorsing this. I'm just showing you what already the internet says before I get into this.
Perhaps in other
This is
materials
expert forensic analysis on the images. It's very dry.
What it would look like and where they would find it.
This is expert analysis again, but very dry. But what he's claiming is a giant robotic alien spaceship is made to look like a long serpent or a dragon with scales that are interlocking and circle within the crater to hide.
Or do you believe that
on
they
the
could
dark
look into
side of the
future
moon
and knew that at the Zeeman crater there would be a series of lows? How else would a highly advanced extraterrestrial civilization excavate the moon? Or reversed? Had an almost unlimited range of supernatural power, did not care about my findings in drawings, and have read about in historical documents, are not just inventions.
We don't have time to go on this. This is an hour-long presentation with expert forensic image analysis showing that clearly something is scrubbed out, whatever you interpret it to be. It is quite large, and it circles the inside of the large crater. I don't care to go into the specifics. I'm a kind of doer in the field guy.
The satellite and all is way.
This is quite in depth. If you want to discount it, discount it. Someone put a lot of work into this. I'm not too worried about it. Moving on. So you see, there's some conspiracy about Clementine, which is malfunctioning May 7th. Now, May 7th, huh? So what was going on right around that time? What was going on right around that time? Could it be anything to do with the Dresden Codex? They were talking about a giant serpent, scaled, feather. Is it possible that what they were talking about was the Golden Dragon of the West, the Quetzalcoatl? Well, there's an eclipse on May 10th, 1994. And it passed right through that location. And when you say that location, what do you mean? Oh, I mean that location. And what happened in an eclipse before? In May 29th, 1919, Einstein's 4-year-old theory of general relativity was put to its first test during a total solar eclipse. By measuring the images of how stars shift when the sun is close by. And with a lot of care, you might be able to repeat the famous test from nearly 100 years ago. Or now 100 years ago, because this is an older article. They measured the displacement of stars in an eclipse in May 1919 and proved the theory of general relativity is that it's not just gravity that things can bend, space-time can bend. Because during an eclipse, the stars were displaced measurably and demonstrably. So what does that mean? That space-time can bend with the right With the right events? During an eclipse? Sounds interesting. How does that relate to Moonchild, though? Because this is taking fucking forever. Well, let me tell you just how it does relate. Project Jehovah. What is Project Jehovah? It was a project that involved Einstein and Oppenheimer. Relations with inhabitants of celestial bodies. Whoop. Which could be the moon. These are all publicly available. I'm not hiding anything here. We just don't have time to go over this. You can pause it and see that if you'd like. I do that plenty of times. I know what I'm showing. Ryan Wood. About the context of the latest batch, Ryan Wood received a dump of these documents, my friend. It includes a reference to Project Jehovah, analyzed for the Majestic 12 Special Studies Group by the famous physicist Albert Einstein and physicist Robert Oppenheimer, Ph.D., director of the Manhattan Project at Los Alamos. Another major scientist referenced in the latest batch of documents is Edward Teller, who directed the U.S. Defense Department's Star Wars efforts under the Ronald Reagan administration of the 1980s. Star Wars comes up again. Woo, with Project Jehovah, with Albert Einstein and Oppenheimer. So what is this? What could this be? What do we have? I specifically want Project Jehovah director Professor Albert Einstein and Dr. Robert Oppenheimer to inject any useful comments into briefings as they are most informed on the physics related to the subject. Perhaps the annual Quantico conference would provide an opportunity to do so without the publicity which would call attention to such a special meeting. Sincerely, Dwight D. Eisenhower. So was Einstein the professor, and then Dr. Robert Oppenheimer was renowned? Well, that's funny because Einstein had proved the theory of general relativity, and Oppenheimer, well, my father studied under Oppenheimer as apprentice. Code word, White Pebble, Mad's ComSec Intelligence Eyes Only. Beneath these words on a line by itself, see the title Project Jehovah. Following that are the words, if true, are truly only epoch-making in their own importance. National Security Code breaking of the Alien Codex and historical research of the Central Intelligence Agency's MJEBEN program and Department of Defense UFO Identification and Detection Project Firestone. Prepared by MJ-12 Group Technical Advisory Panel, MTAP-12. For use by Emergency Combat Communications, ECOMCOM. Completed on October 2nd, 1962. So this goes way back. So what exactly is Project Jehovah? National Security Agency code breaking of Alien Codex. All right. Could Alien Codex possibly relate to the Dresden Codex with the rituals and divination calendar, Saros 128, the eclipse on May 10th, 1994, that passed through where? Where did it pass through? That's what's important. Black Mountain, Washington County, New York. Black Mountain is a mountain located in Washington County, New York, of which its peak is the highest point, isolated from the rest of the Adirondack Mountains, which is the biggest parkland in the United States and the oldest land. It's isolated from the rest of the Adirondack Mountains by Lake George, which is a commonly reported place for certain trafficking survivors. And it has the 7th highest topographic prominence of all the mountains in New York. It's the 7th highest. The Black Mountain also has the highest elevation of any of the peaks which surround Lake George and offer unobstructed views of the lake from its summit. So why is Black Mountain important? Well, we're about to get there. Black Mountain is within the Lake George Wild Forest. It's 6.1 million acre Adirondack Park. It's part of the Adirondack Mountains, which have been dated to the Precambrian time, the Earth's earliest period of history, the oldest land in the world. On top of Black Mountain is a wind turbine, as well as a fire tower, which was decommissioned and fenced off in 1988 after 77 years of service by New York State Fire Service and Forest Rangers, being made in 1911. Being made in 1911. Dresden Codex, Washington County, Dresden, Washington County, the town of Dresden. Black Mountain, Washington County. Black Mountain is in Dresden. It's a town in northern Washington state, and it's part of the Glens Falls, which used to be Wings Falls, where my ancestors are from. So Black Mountain, which was decommissioned in 88, but it was in service for 77 years and built in 1911. And in Glens Falls, which used to be Wings Falls, my ancestors, and that is the town of Dresden. And keep in mind, we're talking about the Dresden Codex. And what is that, this Black Mountain? The station that's been decommissioned, these are all from the Adirondacks. Keep in mind, the 6.1 million area. These are all pictures from different silos that are known in the Adirondacks, which were missile silos, but some are converted. These are all from the Adirondacks. This one, similar to Montauk, which we will not go into. This was a pet project similar to Montauk, but oh so much more. Black Mountain, the weather station. Just a couple of years ago. This doesn't look decommissioned. What do they have? What is this box? What do they have? Also have wind. They have solar, they have wind. That is secluded. What's out there, my friend? Something very dark. And we will get there. When I was young, as I testified to, there's a IT guy and mortician whose wife was a funeral director, Joanne Stafford, and his name was Joseph Page. A letter from my sister, notarized in support during hard times, is given in my testimony so we could pursue justice. This was written in 2014. This is referring to 20 to 22 years ago of her recollection in 2014, but in actuality, I was 4 and she was 8 when this happened, initially started. About 20 to 22 years ago, my brother Gray, because this is my sister writing this, and me went over to our next door neighbor, Mr. Page's house, to help him clean up boxes in his basement. When we first got there, He offered us candy from a candy dish. To our delight, our favorite candy, a strawberry kind with a gooey center, was the type in the dish. Then Mr. Page took us down to his basement where we saw so many boxes piled up with different odds and ends and a teddy bear. As he started going through them, I felt a little heavy. And there was some tiredness coming over me like I'd never felt before, and thought how much I didn't want to do this anymore. I realized now we had been drugged. The next thing Mr. Page said was, "You know, we don't really have to do this." Talking about the box cleanup project we had been brought over for. This was a convenient relief for me because I had just been drugged and wanted to sit down. So Mr. Page then sat me and my brother down and told us that he had something. Something to show us that would change our lives. A trick. He then revealed a corpse that had been covered. He dared me to touch it. I didn't want to, but then he offered me $100. That was incentive enough for me, a girl who had been raised on welfare, desperate to bring the money into my household. So I touched the dead body, and as soon as I felt the cold death, I wanted to leave with Gray. Mr. Page covered up the corpse and coerced us to stay by giving us ice cream. Another drug-laced treat. I remember sitting immobilized next to my brother. Mr. Page brought the dead body over again on a wheelie chair to play more. He fed us more ice cream with bits of the dead body in it, and I remember seeing my younger brother Gray looking so sick. Later, Mr. Page had me masturbate in front of my brother. He threatened us with violence if he told anyone. He threatened to kill my brother. I remember pieces of other occasions in his basement. He put some mind control on us because we started spending time with him, helping him embalm bodies, stitch them, and fondle and caress them sexually. Mr. Page was a mortician who preyed on me and my brother to act out with him, and in our drugged and hypnotized state, we obeyed and kept it secret. Keeping this secret has wreaked havoc on me emotionally and mentally my whole life. I felt so guilty and nervous and confused for so long. I'm grateful to Gray for his strength and shining light on this darkness, and for this letter that is cathartic for me personally. Do you understand? Moonchild. We went over this. Necromancy. Saturnian necromancy. The supposed practice of communicating with the dead. Mortician. Especially in order to predict the future. Alchemy, necromancy, and other magic practices. Sorcery or black magic in general. And this is the Solomon Squares. Yes, it's not just the lesser key of Solomon in the Western world. It was the Solomon Squares. It was also known in the Eastern world. And as you know, many deities and so on and so forth are called different things in different cultures. This is well known as well in the Eastern cultures. And as you see, there's already some similarities. I'm showing this because you already are aware of the other sides of things, such as Westerns. Again, back to the Moonchild, Aleister Crowley. And I grew up around some Crowleys, which I may briefly mention in my testimony. So they're working on a Moonchild, huh? In the mortician's basement. Okay. So they've given a baby a brain implant, have they? Okay. Abnormal brain. Okay. I think we remember this. So, what happens? What happens next? And you remember the astrogenetics, because the parent's genes and your season of birth can influence your life, but with the Mayan prophecies in the Dresden Codex, and the Quetzalcoatl, and the Tokukulan, the Kukulkan, the Kukulkan, and the brain surgery, and Black Mountain on Glens Falls, Wings Falls. And again, the eclipse passes right overhead. And you know what the rituals were. And you know the story of Michael and Satan. And now we'd be being told stories of Michael, the archangel, who came down, and the gold ball representing his soul, and that he would have a clone for deep space travel so he could progress instead of freeze. And he would train and regenerate, and his associates would help raise. And I was told stories. This is called a script. I was told the story of Mithras, who slayed the bull. Mithras, who was born on a rock, of the Mithriatic Mysteries, who was born on a rock at 8 years old. I was told the story of the 51st Psalm with Misamir Medus, of the Infinity Ankh, the 8, Illicibre, Voltimus Illicibre, the greatest enticement through dark magic. I was told the prophecies that a boy at 8 would strike down the beast.
And don't get into the philosophical argument that God created them and they have to be real or does God exist, because it's really an irrelevant argument in this particular context. The critical thing is, if people will kill others because they think their mystical experience, their God experience was true, shouldn't we know the brain mechanisms responsible for that?
So what happened? So what happened? Well, Dr. Persinger was practicing many things. And shortly after this event, he wrote a paper called On the Possibility of Directly Accessing Every Human Brain by Electromagnetic Induction of Fundamental Algorithms. To access everyone's brain. Now, what happened on the day of the eclipse? On the day of the eclipse that shone directly over Black Mountain, from the Dresden Codex, Black Mountain in the oldest land, in a tower that ran 77 years, started in 1911, stopped in 1988, is in the oldest land in the 7th highest, overlooking Lake George in Dresden County, Glens Falls, formerly Wings Falls, in an obvious dome, secluded as could be. If you listen to my testimony, the day I turned 25, I woke up completely remembering an event from my 8th birthday. This event on my 8th birthday allowed me to remember all my programming at once and go against these bastards. Here's a communication from 2014 with my own mother. And I told you that fishy stuff happened to me, and when going over to the questions for baptism of the Jehovah's Witnesses, with an elder, 2 elders were supposed to be present, and only one was for me, and only one for, and that was Chatton, Brother Chatton, you piece of shit. And he took her into a camper trailer alone, and I somehow allowed it. My mother had told me her whole life she was controlled, but she never realized quite that she was split personality. She knew something was going on, but she didn't know how to articulate it. She said, I remember being laid down on the floor by Monroe. Now, who is Monroe and why is this important? Because the Monroes, along with others, had infiltrated Jehovah's Witness Church and were running experiments for the CIA. And it is documented that the Monroe Institute has been involved with the CIA. And there's something called the Gateway Voyage, which teaches controlled out-of-body experiences that happen most often in near-death experiences, but also happen in other settings. Bob Monroe called Gateway a voyage of self-discovery through the gateway of expanded awareness. It's the best way to begin journey at the Monroe Institute, and it's prerequisite for many of our advanced consciousness training programs. Learn to navigate the non-physical realm. During this transformational residential retreat, you'll gain the tools and techniques needed to navigate the non-physical realm. We'll teach you to enter specific levels of expanded consciousness, like the state of no time. There you'll experience deep relaxation and find the guidance that leads to profound insight. You'll also explore the out-of-body state and other life-changing energy systems. Tap into expanded states of awareness. Gateway accelerates your ability to go farther, deeper, and faster into different dimensions of consciousness, thanks to part in our use of binaural beat audio guidance technology, which their patented technology is called Hemisync, which splits the frequency. For example, if you do 8 in one ear and 4 in the other, it splits it to 6, and you tune in at 6. And you can tune to different frequencies. If you're familiar with, for example, Monarch programming, Greek programming, you have alpha, beta, delta, theta, some people epsilon, and then lambda, gamma, hyper gamma, things like this. Shift your perspective on what's possible. With a more enlightened understanding of self and how you relate to others, you'll come to know your life's purpose. With that knowledge comes gratitude of all aspects of your life. Now, the Central Intelligence Agency, again, it is declassified. They use the Gateway Intermediate Workbook, Monroe Institute of Applied Scientists, Gateway Intermediate Workbook. They did all sorts of Monroe Institute technology when they were testing in Stargate. I explained this in another interview I did in Emma Catherine's podcast, the Imagination Podcast, where I explained through the National Defense Education Act and John C. Gowan and John C. Flanagan that designed the Gifted and Talented Education programs, and then also Project Talent, how they were using this technology. Now, so, one must remember, I was trained in the Monroe Institute for controlled out-of-body experiences. I was trained by morticians. And again, very quickly, I want to remind everybody that the Lesser Key of Solomon, or the Solomon Square tablets, the dark magic is really dark neuroscience. And what happens is you use different smells, taste, feels, sounds, colors, frequency, all the different frequencies of the different senses. And you know how sometimes a smell will trigger something. Oh, I smell that pie. It reminds me of Grandma's house. Which is not something I've had, but I'm trying to relate to the layman. Well, it's like a 5-pin key that you would use to unlock your door. And then you have the sight, smell, touch, taste, you see, and so on and so forth. And that unlocks a different part of your brain, perhaps a brain circuit. And you can gain mastery over an individual part of your brain. And it's taught in different ways, in different cultures, different semantics. And some people shy away from it. But in reality, it's good to be aware of what enemies are using and what you can use for development. Don't let bad people ruin a good thing. But the point is, what you must understand. The other thing, believe or not, it doesn't matter. Because placebo can be a hell of a thing. I was told that I can't see the waves coming to the television, and I can't see the waves coming to the radio, but they play. And I was told if I go to South America, I have to be careful swimming because a parasite could go inside my privates. And I was told that there are other sort of parasites that perhaps Western science hasn't caught up with yet. But some Christians may call them demons. But what they are is things that are attracted to certain things. And when your energy is vibrating at a certain frequency, because you're doing such actions, such as painting a sigil in blood on your forehead while committing a certain act such as sodomy, or so on and so forth, it is claimed that these parasites are attracted. And I was told certain parasites will help gain control of certain aspects of your brain and can be harnessed accordingly and can make you powerful beyond the average human being. In something known as occult path working. And as a child, while other children believed in Santa Claus and waited for presents under the Christmas tree, in my daytime life, I was a Jehovah's Witness. I wasn't allowed to watch TV, listen to music, celebrate birthdays, or holidays for that matter, or do anything fun, associate with anybody. I was completely secluded. As a Jehovah's Witness, you can't even accept blood transfusions. But then when I went over to the morticians, as you would see the dichotomy in my testimony, like and subscribe. I could do all the things. So, let's get to the fucking point, shall we? Because it's late and I got shit to do. Woo! So we know that I trained under morticians in necromancy and divination to see the future through dead bodies. And we know that I grew up in Glens Falls, which used to be Wings Falls. And we know that the Dresden Codex shows the location of rain gods and eclipse calendars. And we know that the town of Dresden is where the Black Tower was. And we know about astrogenetics from Van Deusen's, from the 88 acres where I grew up. And we know the theory of general relativity, which lends credence to the divination, which you see future through supernatural acts, but with an eclipse of space-time spans, perhaps through ritual trauma. If through ritual trauma you can force an out-of-body or near-death experience. And what if someone that had prepared at the Monroe Institute with out-of-body controlled experiences and deep meditation Force an out-of-body experience at an eclipse where space-time is bending. What could happen?
And don't.
Well, we have people making graphics from Alchemy Carta, the AA, the SS, the AA. Started in 77 once MK Ultra hit the fan. Coincidence? We're getting there. We're getting there. So what did they tell me?
Well, this is the Koren helmet after Stan Koren, who built it. It was based upon a design where we figured that the most effective way to influence the brain is very weak magnetic fields that work at the level of consciousness, the electromagnetic fields associated with consciousness, which are very, very weak. And so consequently, these different solenoids generate little teeny magnetic fields that are then generated between the temporal lobes, all right? And the pattern that's generated across will, after about 15 minutes, in the dark, with the eyes closed, produce experiences that are very similar to many, many mystical experiences. You don't need big, massive, intense fields. That's an interesting mentality, the idea of the bigger the better. Nah, normally physiology doesn't work that way. So that's procedure, and of course this cannot be done without computers. The signaling, the information being sent through the solenoids, is thanks to the fact that computers have infinite possibilities of patterns. And in those patterns is information. And information does not have to be loud. It doesn't have to be ostentatious. It just has to be essential.
Okay.
I guess I was sort of in a state of fear where I didn't want to turn around and look.
A very friendly, welcoming
What is this
feeling
about?
at one instance.
I was starting to feel very anxious and very cold.
The outlines of a human body,
Almost complete and total panic.
very visual experiences. One of the first ones
Here at Laurentian
These are
University
people
in
that
Sudbury,
know they're
Ontario, a team is
testing
investigating
this.
certain common perceptions of the inner mind.
We'll be taking a baseline recording first.
Not someone near half
Right
knocked
now,
out.
they're looking at the
Laid out on a
electromagnetic
slab.
brain patterns seen in people having the near-death experience.
Going to compare that.
The research is led by Dr. Michael Persinger.
Basically, at any given time, all experience is due to those portions of the brain that are most metabolically active. If we can
For what you
simulate
have
that
given
by
me,
applying
you stupid
complex,
fuck.
meaningful magnetic fields to the brain, we can also induce those experiences.
This experiment is testing the idea that mystical perceptions and paranormal experiences can be turned on at will, not by hypnosis or shamanic drumming, but by a scientist, stimulating nerve activity in the brain.
Headphones on. So they don't split off. Okay. These machines aren't on.
The volunteer sits blindfolded in a soundproof chamber. This sensory deprivation allows the mind to focus on electromagnetic patterns transmitted across the brain through this modified crash helmet.
If you feel anything change with the electrodes.
They're able to simulate the exact brain patterns that occur in near-death
Is
experiences.
that comfortable?
Yeah.
Dr. Persinger hopes the research will benefit psychotherapy.
We tried to evoke the fragments that compose the near-death experience and other mystical experiences, such as detachment, feelings of moving through a tunnel, hearing voices, the sense of a presence, usually on the left side. Our major thrust is ultimately to apply this to dealing with things such as psychological depression.
No, it's not.
After a while, I remember feeling that there was someone else in the room with me, almost looking over my left shoulder. It was all I could do to not turn my head and want to look.
If you stimulate the deep portions of the temporal lobe, so you can get very, very vivid imagery, and the emotional commitment or the emotional sensation that something is profound, real, cosmically real,
You hear this?
personally significant.
It's a male voice, but it's like really, really far away. As if you can just sort of like catch a tone. You can't really hear. You can tell that it's someone talking. You can distinguish that, but you can't make out any kind of words or anything like that.
What we've been doing recently is generating words as magnetic patterns. And even though the person isn't hearing it through their ears, their brain is interpreting it. So they're actually...
Now listen.
Words as magnetic...
Like that.
This is important.
What we've been doing recently is generating words as magnetic patterns. And even though the person
words
isn't
as
hearing it
magnetic
through
patterns.
their ears, their brain is interpreting it. So they're actually having fragments of experiences as if they're hearing it when in actual fact it cannot be.
These experiences are so strong, they're utterly real for the person who has them. They can be as profound as a religious conversion, yet we can generate them with a machine. These mind games are beginning to shed their secrets. The scientist becomes the shaman. But what are the limits? What else can people be made to believe?
But one thing that's really clear, you can control the person's experiences and they don't know they're being controlled. That's why this technology is a potentially powerful one and has a two-edge to its sword.
As a tool of science, this technology may bring us valuable new understandings of the obscure depths of the human mind. But there's a dark side. In the wrong hands, could it become an instrument of power, a means of oppression? If we're not careful, will mind games one day become mind control?
A daunting question that I think we all know the answer to.
Next on TLC, how many ways could there...
So, here we are. We've reached an impasse. Before we go to the finale, so to speak, let me show you again what the scientist is working on.
Talking about. Suppose you had access to the information of every other brain on this planet. No more secrets. Are we all connected? And the answer is yes. We are all immersed in the Earth's magnetic field. The human species is about 7 billion conductive brains, all sharing this field. Think of 7 billion wires, all immersed in the Earth's magnetic field. This field contains enough energy to store the experience of every human being who has ever lived. It's an easy calculation. Just think about that. All the information of every human brain that's ever lived has the potential to be stored in the magnetic field with lots of energy left over. There's the Earth's magnetic field. You've seen it on many occasions. In fact, the strength of the magnetic field induced in every brain, right now you're being induced, to put it this way, you are immersed in the Earth's magnetic field, is penetrating through your brain, through your body. And in fact, the strength of the magnetic field induced in every brain by the Earth's magnetic field, when all brains are considered, is almost identical to the strength that each brain generates. Your brain generates in the order of about a picotesla, which is about a trillionth of a Tesla, much weaker than the Earth's magnetic field. But that's the operational intensity. But what does it mean? It means simply this. Such convergence produces the conditions that allow global resonance and the possibility of a human hologram. That is, 7 billion brains, basically immersed in the Earth's magnetic field, all with similar intensities, the whole equal the sum, and the sum equal the individual equal the sum. That sets up the conditions for a hologram.
Calculations suggest that the time required for an event in one human brain to diffuse into
10
all other human
minutes.
brains on this planet would be about 10 minutes. And it would recur primarily during dreams or during altered states. In other words, you can actually calculate it.
Altered brain states.
Calculation. One brain,
Access to all human brains in the grid of consciousness in Earth's magnetic field, aka the Akashic Records, or so many more names. Semantics is not important.
So here's how it would look in terms of a animation. Effectively.
So, allow 20 seconds again to put this into perspective. The man that can access all
What we've been
brains.
doing recently is generating words as magnetic patterns. And even though the person isn't hearing it.
So again, as I was born and received a brain implant from the man who believed you could transfer souls, and went to the class where we practiced projecting consciousness, and was born on my mother's and grandmother's birthday, when a book about astrogenetics was written by the Van Dusens, which were also our next door neighbors, who owned 88 acres. And we know that the satellite Clementine, Project Golden Dragon, Quasicodal, was malfunctioning. But what else? Well, for the Dresden Codex, the sacrifice required death, it required bait, it required lure. And Jeffrey Dahmer, at the time considered the #1 serial killer, was baptized in prison. And John Wayne Gacy, at the time considered the #2 serial killer, was executed. That's right, on May 10th, 1994, Gacy was executed by lethal injection at Stateville Correctional Center, the same day that Dahmer was baptized as he sought redemption for the heinous crimes. The two serial killers slaughtered 50 young men and boys between them. That's right, on May 10th, 1994, Jeffrey Dahmer sought redemption and was baptized. And John Wayne Gacy had been sentenced to death. And side note, they took his brain for inspection. As lure through the eclipse on May 10th, 1994, that passed through upstate New York's location of Glens Falls, which my ancestors owned as Wings Falls. And what they told me, in Project Stargate, at the electronic perturbation testing, with all the testing, with the remote viewing, with the psychokinesis testing, what do you think they were doing? I've been dancing around saying this, so I'm just gonna fucking say it. In my testimony, I explained what happened to my grandfather. What I didn't explain is that the morticians they convinced me that my grandfather was evil, and since he had molested me, he deserved to die. And as my family had always not quite shown me the attention, and I wasn't allowed to do anything as a Jehovah's Witness, and at the morticians, they would give me all the treats and make me feel special. I had over time bonded to them in a trauma bonding Stockholm Syndrome situation. And as they taught me the dark arts, they told me they would teach me and that I should kill my grandfather. And the first ritual that I was to head was the ritual to psychically kill my grandfather. Some kids believe in Santa Claus. I led my first ritual to stop my grandfather's heart. And in the morning I woke and my grandfather had passed. So did they poison my grandfather? Is this some sick placebo joke to prepare a child and think that he has mental powers to teach him to bottle up rage and use it operationally, to teach him to occult path work, forensic cadaver analysis, Saturnium necromancy, the Pythagorean theorem, so much more. Is it a sick game? And then we had my grandfather's body. And they showed me that not only has his heart stopped, but it had exploded. It doesn't matter if you believe this is possible, or if the Pages and Staffords opened my grandfather up and mutilated his heart to further brainwash his grandson, which they had brainwashed to at least wish him death, as they really carried out the task. Or did something else happen? I'm going to show you what I wrote in 2016, then I'll show you what I wrote in 2013. In 2016, I wrote an article about Michael Persingers that showed you with the helmet called God Told Me To, alien visitation, the Koran God helmet, and dirty rotten tricks. Forward. I'm not claiming people have not had holy visions, or that there is not such a thing as aliens. I'm not claiming anything, other than the type of thing I describe below does in fact take place. Certain intelligence agencies, as well as other groups, or whatever term you want to use, have been known to employ some pretty nasty methods to get the job done by any means necessary. Keep in mind, you probably want to distance yourself, layer in plausible deniability. This method can be used in anyone, very close to the way hypnotic stage show would play out. To gain a better understanding of how exactly this is put into effect, let me explain a couple things. I go on to explain post-hypnotic suggestion, post-hypnotic amnesia, and the basic recipe for preparation, which is to torture someone into a frozen state where it's almost a Blake state and they're traumatized. Specifically with children, when you get them in this state, you can train this from this state in a repressed manner and attach a post-hypnotic suggestion to it to have them remember this state at any time. Once you kind of short-circuit their conscious and you have a direct line to their subconscious, you can implant certain NLP, neuro-linguistic protocol, post-hypnotic suggestions, and so on and so forth. And if you're skilled at this art, and it is an art, you can do so very effectively. And what I describe is getting this traumatized part, and then in a drugged up state, hooking them up to this helmet. And you understand with this helmet with the patterned message, what they did to me was say, you were born on May 10th, 1986, and your mother was born on May 10th, and your grandmother was born on May 10th, and you were chosen. You were chosen for greatness. And as everybody in these programs, I was to be filled with the Antichrist spirit. They had many names for this, but it was all the same. And I dutifully followed my task and went through the prerequisite training with the Saturnian necromancer morticians who had me practice killing my grandfather and then mutilating his dead body, and had me practice with blood seals and sigils on my forehead. As I looked in the mirror, crossing my eyes to lock in on one eye in the middle, and repeated affirmations of invocation to receive great power. And some kids believe in Santa Claus. I was raised in the Adirondacks, believing I had been filled with spirits of power. And on May 10th, 1994, which is my 8th birthday, they told me I was to be filled with a spirit and I had been chosen. I was turning 8 and I had been chosen. And they showed me the location. And the ritual was to be the Abraham ritual, where he's tested by God upon the mountain to offer his own firstborn child. And the Dresden Codex was carried out according to its calendar and depictions of the location of the rain god which at that point we knew to be Black Mountain in Dresden for the Dresden Codex of Glens Falls, which was Wings Falls, at the Underground Dome. And on my 8th birthday, they took me. And I first told this back in late 2013 after I was released from prison. And those who followed my testimony know the war I've been with these pedocultists, these current group that has generational momentum and infrastructure that is running our world that is not for long. And I recommended they get some background information. And I told them in 2013, because when I was 25, I remembered all this. And I was sent to prison for years on false charges, mostly in solitary confinement. Well, I cooled down. In 2013, after I had remembered my 8th birthday on May 10th, 1994, when Project Clementine, the deep space science experiment that mapped the dark side of the moon, was testing telemetry, failed, supposedly. With Project Jehovah, the alien codex was decoded, and they were decoding an alien transmission that they're receiving data at the times of eclipse. They were picking up weird signals. When space-time was bending, and according to the Dresden Codex and the location of where they do the sacrifice to gain oracle of a young boy. I'm telling my story as is. In 2013, I was writing this before I had realized about the helmet in 2016. Keep in mind. Some of the things I experienced were while under extreme duress, and I acknowledged the possibility of some memories being unreliable. For example, if you show advanced technology to a child, it would be easy to trick them into believing it was magic in nature or of an alien origin. Furthermore, the technology could be made to appear more miraculous than it already was with the aid of drugs or hypnosis. Usually, it was a combination of all of the above and then some. But some things can't be manipulated. Like my generational birthday. And the fact that obviously something had to happen at the eclipse on my birthday to erase my whole family's memory. You don't have to believe that the military has experimented on the public, even though it's public record. You don't have to believe that some people practice Satanism, or ritual sacrifice, and worship ancient gods, although there's plenty material on this as well. But they do. And unfortunately, several of them are your so-called leaders. Political, industrial, or otherwise. You might not believe, but if you don't, do yourself a favor. Make sure that the decision is based on facts. This affects everyone. You don't have to believe, and when you don't, it makes it easier for them. Why is this so important to me? From the poor boy who goes through satanic ritual abuse and government mind control conditioning to the 12-year-old girl dressing like a slut giving blowjobs at a line of guys in the bathroom at school while the latest pop star sings about it. To save the victims who are actually sacrificed. To save that poor boy's friend who won't make it through government conditioning. To save that poor girl's daughter from the same abuse at the hands of her DID mother. In addition, the active suppression of new, cleaner power sources and technology by the elite through the military-industrial complex has led to unnecessary catastrophes and an overall degraded and unstable environment. Our worldwide power system is sure to self-destruct over long term from natural disasters alone. Look at the nuclear power plant track records. How many do we have? We don't seem to be experts at containment and cleanup either, do we? Let's not even talk about food. Food. There are many survivors out, healing themselves and others. They have my full support and are in my prayers. My heart goes out to them, and I invite them to network with me. I've reached out a lot with little feedback so far, but I feel that it's due to my initial state of shock from rapid upheaval of memories and feelings. I'm all over the place and hard to deal with. Maybe that and a combination of everyone involved having to have their hands full. Let's get to it. So who are you and what do you want? One last time. Born, brain implant, Robert J. White, talking about transplanting soul. Dresden Codex, eclipses, rain god locations, Monroe Institute, gateway voyage, out of controlled, out of body, controlled out of body experiences. We'd hope so. Dresden Codex, Quetzalcoatl, Kukulkan, Feathered Serpent, the White Feathered Serpent of Light, the Golden Dragon, Eastern, Solomon Seal, Divination, Eclipse, General Theory of Relativity. Do I sound mad yet? If you don't get it by now, you don't fucking get it. I was kept secluded my whole childhood under the guise of being a poor Jehovah's Witness in order to be better supervised and manipulated while enrolled in a program that in many ways similar to MK Ultra, Project Monarch, etc. This program was secretly funded and, at least behind the scenes, by some very horrible people. They used the guise of national security to justify unethical conditioning, torture, to get funding. They use end product to promote their own agenda, which is not in the best of the interest of the people, trust me. Basically, intelligence agencies and affiliates used top-of-the-line methods to turn me into a very interesting type of sleeper, mind-controlled super spy, similar to the Manchurian candidates. The elite rulers behind all this funding and shot-calling try to use my body to host the Antichrist, more or less. They did this in a very crazy ritual that was mostly based on astrological synchronization. In 2013, I'm writing this. Keep in mind, this is 10 years ago. A lot has happened since then, and I wrote the article about the God Helmet that sends pattern messages of scripts. I am what I am at this point, something different. I used to want to rule the world, cloning myself and having society guardians watch over young me's until they come of age, not linear. At which point, one would ritually inhale my life breath, at which point, amnesia barriers break down and all knowledge is passed down. Comb, sync chips, neural splits, plus magic breath itself. Life breath, so although body is clone, your essence is true. A lot of technology and preparation as well here. Bottom line is living forever with important knowledge and new upgrades passed down as well as your actual essence. Soul, spirit, neshama type of stuff. How about certain outgoing samples of Caucasian sperm from mail-ordered banks would also be substituted with my samples? Ooh, that's getting a little too real. We just switched back. Mother's genetics would be a determining factor if it merited the switch. My host, Everyday Alter, which in my case was shell or invisible mask blend programming, had turned consciously towards evil without even realizing what it was. My thought pattern had become that corrupted from early on. That is a very dangerous point when everyday you chooses the dark side. Do the dark altars still hide? That would depend, now wouldn't it? Maybe it's not the dark altars hiding. They've been there all along, doing. Maybe the conscious me is the one hiding. Like a protective mother hiding from the fact that her son is a monster. It came from her. It is a part of her and she loves it. But just can't face what it is. I can face it all and just realize now how I was tricked. All of me. Not only tricked, but suppressed and controlled. Ultimately, sadly, by myself and my own desires. Although there was plenty of outside force and manipulation along the way. Get to the point! Okay. I'm at the Achilles here. So I'm gonna shoot an arrow. I just was kind of hoping someone would give a fuck so the real me, deep inside, will have a reason to come out. I'm having trouble convincing him myself, and if you know about DID, you know this is real and a process. He wants to help those who want to help, not those who are very negative about him trying to help. Below is the list of the references you might want to check after you read this. The one who runs things works with the same deities and since ancient times, known by different names, of course. May 10th is me, my mother, and my grandmother's birthday. On May 10th, 1994, it was my 8th birthday. There's a Mayan codex called the Dresden Codex that describes rituals, eclipse cycles, the location of rain gods, which happen to be the same rain gods worshipped by ancient Babylonians and modern-day Satanists. Well, May 10th, 1994 was also a solar eclipse, and it passed right over my location at the time, New York. They performed a major ceremony, I would say. Sacrificial divination. Point is, they succeeded in the most horrible way for them. And I was filled with the Holy Spirit of Jesus. You stupid motherfuckers. Look what you've done. And not the dark spirit I think they wish to make homunculus or Nephilim with. At this point of enlightenment, I remembered all time and space, and even though I was in my satanic altar, I realized how wrong it all was and how we, my family mainly, were tricked and manipulated and tortured. It was a huge problem for them, and I wrapped the situation up rather swiftly. How do you like me now? Unfortunately, when I came to, switched back, I guess, hard to tell. I was completely amnesic as usual. Flash forward 17 years to my 25th birthday, and I remember the eclipse, but I think it was a one-time event from back when my family were Jehovah's Witnesses, and we had a local cult abducted us. Flash forward 16 days from my 25th birthday, I realized I was and am living a cover life. My whole childhood was CIA ran and DARPA made, and I'm on my way to prison. Flash forward to present day, a year out of prison, officially marijuana grow house conspiracies, which is not why I went. I realize now, no, remember subsequent research, a lot about the hierarchy, my place in it, layers of amnesia within hierarchy that extends further than here, and I'm getting together, negotiating my arrival. Hi.
So consciousness can be transplanted. Obviously, personality, if you want to speak of the monkey having personality, can be transferred. And so you might ask, where did this bring us as far as the human spirit or soul goes? And I guess you could argue it can be transplanted.
So that's it. On my birthday, my 8th birthday, there was also my mother and grandmother's birthday, when deep space science experiment Clementine that mapped the dark side of the moon, which there's a major controversy of, talking about Golden Dragon, and there was testing telemetry failed. Well, John Wayne Gacy was executed and Jeffrey Dahmer was baptized as bait lure to draw something through the eclipse when space-time is bending, such as proved in the May 1919 eclipse to prove Albert Einstein's theory of general relativity. What came through? Is that what a Moonchild is? Were they just sending pattern messages? Did they just line up some random shit in order to make a programming script to trick a kid into thinking he had an entity within himself? Is that placebo? Like the ancient days of the story of the Hashashin, who they would drug and then would wake up in a different room thinking it was paradise, and then be told they have to go on a mission, but if they succeed, they will come back and then be drugged again and wake up, carrying out the assignment by any means necessary, knowing that heaven awaited them in Valhalla, if you will. What is the truth? Is there an astrological synchronization? Was there something to it? Was there something to the brain surgery and the dates and the location and the Dresden Codex and Quetzalcoatl, the Golden Dragon? Or is it just placebo?
And don't get into the philosophical argument that God created them and they have to be real or does God exist, because it's really an irrelevant argument in this particular context. The critical thing is if people will kill others because they think their mystical experience, their God experience was true, shouldn't we know the brain mechanisms responsible for that?
Sometimes I think it doesn't matter. You could never stop me.